Depends on your point of reference.
Well, you know, it's pretty amazing. If I walk out here to everything that they've grown, all the plants and the cauliflower, I told you kidding around, the cauliflower looked like that plant that was going to eat you in that movie, the plant that started to eat people. The vegetables were so big that they kind of had a presence of their own. You know what I mean? And huge in some cases. So by walking around out there was pretty remarkable if you looked at it. You looked how much work went into it. You looked how they were nuancing. They were also creating diets. The folks like Brenda and Janet and Mary are creating diets for themselves by what they're growing. You know, and they know the soil. They get ladybugs and stuff like that to enrich the thing. And then she's got those big pot plants back there, but they have to be the female plant, and it has to be the indica one, and it's this, and there's a blending of this. And so somehow, when I'm walking through there and see it for the first time, because I'm not in the doing mode, I'm in the interaction with everyone, kind of finding something for themselves where they're really into growing, or but they're not only growing, but creating their own diets. You want the job? And then there's now only 3 black dogs barking and rounding everyone up, and I'm supposed to come out at a certain time. And
did one of the dogs pass? Did one of the dogs pass?
Yeah, Bella, the one named after my mother, died.
Oh.
Yeah, and she was a sweetheart, but lasted long here. So now we have an adopted one there that's what they named Shorty, that you can't touch yet, although Mary and Brenda can now touch maybe Janet, because he put fireworks on him. And so I guess they burned him, so you can still see through the fur, the pinkishness on his back, you know. So, and then there's Ray, another little character, and Big, the one that Segway secretly found years ago and kept in the yurt, hidden in the yurt, that is huge, was a Great Dane.
He kept him hidden from you guys in the yurt?
For 3 weeks there, I think.
Oh
right?
my God.
She was a puppy
She
then.
was a huge puppy.
A huge. So then Brenda and it must be the child of Brenda, the secret child of Brenda, because they are kind of interactive. They are so. And when I look at the dog, I see how remarkably how it could measure how many hours it's going to be, what food is available, how it can sniff, how they round out. One dog barks on when I should get up in the morning, starts barking at my dog. So they got a whole scene going here where I'm supposed to be out at a certain time, and they arrange, you know. And it's amazing how they can parse out the one big black dog, Sammy, named after my brother, who then informed me that his name is Sal, not Sammy. But then, so I didn't want to change the dog's name to Sal because it's a female. But anyway, she is. Once you start to examine these dogs, you see how brilliant they are in organizing things, and then coyotes in the nighttime, and then his dog starts barking so loudly and chasing, and so it's that I could be in such a scene is pretty weird. Where some of them were babies from the first order that started to also wanted to suck on. They were fighting all the time.
That's stinky too, that many cats. I mean,
yeah. Well, that's so then the dog ate the kittens. We couldn't find the kittens. And then you had this guilty look on her face there.
Wow.
Kittens when we were out. When I got back from India the first time, I ran into that dog in a pack of dogs like they have in India, or they have out here in by the tribal land. You see packs of wild dogs running around. You have that in India a lot too, where dogs compete with kids and people for food and stuff. And when I came back, I found them with about 9 other dogs in the street, like menacing around garbage cans. But then when she looked at me, she kind of still gave up a little bit, the wildness, and reach her. So it's a funny thing that when you start to, there was a language that you developed with the animal. And in that language, somehow you were free from getting bitten or this or that, that somehow you could interrupt the dog before it goes wild. And yet, if you were a stranger in the situation, the only way you could interrupt the dog was to kind of introduce fear or something, a larger form of fear. But somehow, with a big dog like that, I can say, Sammy, sit down. But then they all shout. They have to order it because, but then I say, so I'm trying a different approach. Trying some mantras and stuff like that. Be cool. And to some degree, there is a kind of surrender happening. A surrender meaning the relaxed body. Sometimes I can put my hand on her neck there and she relaxes her body. And then you can rub her belly and rub the dog's belly or something. But once they've relaxed like that, there's a different situation, But Shorty is extremely difficult to relax because the wounds must still be hurting.
Oh, yeah. It's horrifying.
What a weird conversation that is. Is that somehow a spiritual one, Kerry?
Yeah, definitely.
Where did you get this rug?
That's I'm in John's apartment. That's something John put up when he was singing in here so he wouldn't bother the neighbors so much.
I may have given him that rug. Looks like an Afghan rug.
Yeah.
Is it soft?
Pretty soft, yeah.
Yeah, that's really nice. So this is John's apartment.
Yeah.
And you're looking a little bit like, he looks a little bit like John here there. Doesn't he?
Here's all his plants. They're still living and looking well.
So let's call it holy shit again.
Yeah.
That somehow your life resembles more Jesus's life than a regular person's life. Like Jesus gets a job, Jesus grows up, Jesus gets singing lessons, but has a completely almost a show business existence where relationships come more out of feelings than from the history.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. How are you doing, Kerry?
It's been a weird time, Danny. It's part of me starts thinking about how to move forward and what to do and to where to live and all these things, and then part of me just realized I can't figure that out. I can't figure out the next step in life.
Well, it's always nice to be invited. So what does invitation mean? That's not only, hey, baby, why don't you come over for a while with a feeling and where it's not a trip, So let's say kidding around saying, hey, baby, but hey, baby is kind of reflective of an invitation that touches you. So then you say, without that invitation, then you're coming from your own. There's a mixture of survival and there's a mixture of, but how you've done it before. And then you're in the midst of relationships. And so let's say it resembles more a mathematical puzzle than it does a literal concern, because as you come down to earth for the practical problem, let me see, how would I figure it out? The teacher who you were working for passes away. The girlfriend that you've lived with can't hear that you found someone new and you'd like to be able to have a new life. And and you're kind of broke. And
Mm-hmm.
okay, let me see if I'm gonna enter into your movie. Okay, but then when I enter, so now it's a movie for me here.
Yeah.
Say, okay, you had this, you had that. You don't have a stash.
Nope.
So, so then hanging out in John's apartment is really hanging out in John's apartment.
It is.
At the same time, it is honoring something with John, but
Yeah.
you also it also fits in. So you can almost say, "Thank you, John, for leaving me the apartment." It is in fact our apartment that we've had
Yeah.
30 something years, that passed on to John, that passed on to Frank, that passed on to a few people.
Yeah.
In fact, Jennifer, I think, had the apartment originally.
Mm.
Remember Jennifer? Jennifer Bury Kai? Yeah. So she was nice, wasn't she? Yeah. She was taught dancers and helped them physically.
She's the one that I flew out to.
Key West.
Yeah, for the first time that I saw you.
Yeah, and we met Shel Silverstein out there. Do you remember Shel Silverstein out there at that time?
Yeah,
Yeah, he was a funny guy.
that whole thing happened with Naropa.
And then Naropa called, and Shel Silverstein empathized with him.
Yeah.
Another lonely guy, but then it seemed that Naropa worked lonely guy, like that was his job.
Yes.
So then it made you look like maybe Krishna was a lonely guy. Maybe that the women who were attracted to Krishna were not women who wanted to be mothers or anything. Okay. But the poor guy wanted to console the poor guy. It's possible. So let's say if there's no real hurt in the story that we call hurt, like a punch in the nose or something like that, or being thrown off the roof or poison, but the hurts become more psychological and ethereal. And yet from the outside looking in, it looks like the person had a privileged life. But then as you get closer, you see that somehow it's almost the person is born with hurt.
Yes.
And then it literalizes. Why?
Mhm.
So in their mind's eye, they try to locate a reason, but the hurt seems to escape being reasonable.
Yes. Yeah.
In other words, as you explore one is more getting rid of the motive of getting rid of the hurt seems to activate the hurt to be more subtle and creative. That it's not, it literalizes in moments, but it seems like the hurt runs through the life. And now they have scientifically said that what we call hurt memory is not affected by time, that there's where it stores these things. So if some similar smell or situation comes, it activates something that's there in you. In other words, say you're allergic to a certain smell.
Mm.
Or nuts, like some people are allergic to nuts, and you may eat something that you didn't know had nuts in it, and you get an allergy to it. So they say also that the hurt, when it's stored like that through memory, is not always literal memory. It can be associated with smells or experiences or whatever, but it's there.
Mhm.
So when an incident happens, it looks like you go back in time, but as a matter of fact, the time is there inherently in the memory. So that somehow the hurt is in the story. So let's say you navigated a life. And you have a PhD in anything then? No. You've navigated the school system too.
Me?
Well, all of us basically, let's say, have somehow kept a show business style life. So it wouldn't have said so much basically the show business style life or the creative life would be more around what looked like screw ups.
Mm.
That not even that you failed the test, but you forgot the date of the test. So it was even a schmuck. You would have passed the test okay, but you forgot to go in time. And okay. And okay. And I remember taking a test to go like to, how weird this was. I was in a kind of what they called youth house because we wouldn't tell the name of the bigger boy who got us in trouble. And so I was then probably in junior high school, but you had to take a test. You can get there a year earlier if you, but I was also being held in this place because they were teaching us to make potholders as a little kid because we wouldn't give the name of the older boy. We didn't want to be rat. That sounds dumb when we were kids. So they then took me in a bus to take this test for Brooklyn Tech, which was a mathematical test, engineering. But then the typing teacher told me that rate times time equals distance. And it all came home to me just before I took the test. I would have never figured it out. That it comes
Wow.
like Albuquerque is an hour away or 60 miles away. And that's all was in that one little thing, rate times time equal distance, distance times time equals rate. So she just whispered in my ear that thing before I took the test.
Oh.
And it was pretty remarkable that it all came home to me that you do that automatically. So she kind of revealed the automatic mathematics that happen in one's thinking anyway. Just in the situation where you say, okay, then how the hell did Kerry get this far? Where he's got a rug and he's sitting in the apartment of John's in San Francisco with a rug behind him. When he doesn't, what did you study to get you into such a situation where you're in an apartment and it's natural and you've got an Afghan looking rug behind you and John just passed away and you were there for it? What's the name of the movie?
How I Did It.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
How it happened. What the, who the, when the,
Yeah.
why
Seems
the,
like, yeah.
So let's examine, let's say, literalize your life. And you say, who in those episodes that you've gone through, is there a Kerry, a literal Kerry in there that you see?
Not so much.
So then Kerry has usually had the equation of that your relationship to John has your relationship to this place now that you're in. Your relationships to these love affairs or friendships that you've had have given you places to be.
Yeah.
And as it shifted and you can't hide it, then the situation is always in flux.
Mm-hmm.
But the life has been in flux. And if you look at your parents through a long telescope, you see that their life was in flux, that it could have passed in 1 second. And yet somehow it carried on. And you also see that Kerry could have had how many situations that you've been in. Okay. And yet Kerry didn't break the law, and Kerry didn't become a criminal, and Kerry didn't do this. And what's the philosophy again? Maybe we'll ask Urja. What's the philosophy that you got to 81 years old? What did you do? Some Jewish thing you were doing? Or Christian thing? You were saying what? What's the philosophy again then, Kai?
I don't have one.
I would say
Be loving.
okay. So then you kind of understand that you come into the story from that feeling, or you're attempting then to re-enter the story. And you see where some cases you've almost gotten your ass kicked because of that. But because of that, they couldn't fully kick your ass either.
It's true.
Okay, so it would be like, because there's also, so let's say holy shit is because as you go into the literal world, it's around literal life. But as you go into a more spiritual world or a creative world that you're in, then feelings that are suppressed in the literal world because they interfere with business, they interfere with logical decision making. Where you find yourself more in the things that are considered to be dopey are in fact creative for you. And so that somehow you found the creative life to be where you kind of assume identities in different situations. And there is a moment when the attraction to you was more the attraction to the essence of you, not the literalness of you. That's the difference between the movie you and the literal you. The literal you has an ID and a social security and this and that. But where you feel to make a life in is more of a creative you. That is not so owned by the identity. But when there's a mutual feeling, there's something shared. So let's say that would be what you would say that a Shiva meant when the celibacy made to be that your body and your brain only could make love when it's in love. And so that intimacy into the situation is there because there is an intimacy in fact. That so from Shiva's perspective, the question was the truth of something, the depth of the feeling of something.
Mm-hmm.
So you see then, Carrie, to a large extent, you've made almost a creative career of a shared life.
Mm-hmm.
And then some incidents happen that don't, it looks like the incidents created the shift, but you see the shift was happening, the incident just revealed it.
Mm.
So it's like when you get a diagnosis of cancer, they just reveal that the cancer was happening all along. It's just, you've noticed it. You see. So then you become aware that somehow the nature of something is shifting. But it looks like it shifted on that day because of this situation. But you see, it was in a kind of flux all along. It was kind of dependent on there be a feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a difference between the feeling maturing or literalizing in the world. So as it became a literal thing, increasingly survival became the strongest issue.
Mm.
And as survival becomes the strongest issue, then spirituality seems really dopey. If the landlord's going to come tomorrow or something like that, or this is happening, or you've got cancer, then it seems like, okay. So somehow, but as a matter of fact, when Marty was saying to me that maybe with his girlfriend, I said that he was going to do treatment. I said, treatment for your own survival is your thing. But in fact, the treatment for the love affair may be a very different thing. And I said, what would treatment for the love affair may be? And I said, maybe go to Bali for a couple of weeks and you take some tea there and you lay up and, and they say, and I say, it would be good for the love affair. It would be good for the body. I think, if it may be good for the love affair, it may be good for the body.
Yeah.
Okay, so then I say, why? Because then the love affair is looking for its own situation. So it doesn't usually decide on toxic things. It kind of let's say I may decide, I say, look, I'll buy a year. So I'll play with the vaccine thing or whatever. And I see morally it's going around. So for me, I can buy some time, but I'm 81, okay. So then let's say you enter into the story and you buy your time. And time is not so much literal time in years, or maybe, but it's not generally, it is towards the experience. So I think then you see that both somehow you've survived, But it hasn't been always around survival. It has always been also around deeply shared life. And when that deeply shared life is interrupted over some issue or something, there is a hurt that happens, and that hurt happens between the people. So even if they make up, the hurt still is kind of hanging out in some way. Always a creative dynamic. So you see, upon reflection, that your life has almost been, in fact, entirely a creative act. And you've used logic to rationalize what you've been through. But if you had to literally explain, even scientifically, what this life has been for you, and what a love affair really is, and what happens in it, and what happens when you lose, and what cells surrender, and what part of the brain gives in, and how does it shift, you see the remarkably creative thing happening where the person is only secondary to this creative act. It would be as if the creative act is saying, we need a person to play out this story. And they say, there's a guy near San Francisco named Kerry. Let's get him. And we'll put him into this situation where he's just going to look for singing lessons. And all of a sudden, this whole world happens out of nowhere. Do you want to roll in that movie, Kerry? Or Derek? Do you want to roll in that movie?
I had a role in that movie.
I understand. But now that you see it as a movie and not as a real thing that happened, there you are with your hands in your pocket, walking down the street.
I maybe would have negotiated with the director a bit.
You think in going back into the story, you would have renegotiated the story?
Maybe a little.
So then you would have said, how would you have explained then going back into the story? Okay, let's say you're there at the time that you get married, and ostensibly to get a green card or whatever, but it's coming out of the storyline of the relationships that you had there. So it's not someone just in the street coming up to you and asking for a green card, but someone who established a relationship in the family or friends there. So that's a bit like the fellow John here, when who was visiting from England. What was her name again? Glenna, yeah, was visiting, and she says, when will I find someone? And he said, I may be that someone. How about immediately from the end of the table, their relationship, they started to explore a relationship. So what looks to them like a literal relationship is in fact this thing that came out of the end of the table. It's more coming out of the energy, but then it literalizes. Okay. So when the relationship comes out of the energy somewhat, out of meaning, comes out of the theater, let's say you're in a play with someone, and in the play you fall in love with that person, and you literally take the relationship from the play into a literal story. You see that much of that will happen in the literal story will be based at the origins of it came from a different place. And it was a creative exploration. And you see that as the relationships literalize, it starts to lose the creative dimension, where everyone's role then becomes fixed. So that means that you don't change the toilet paper roll easily because you know the other one will do the okay. So the small things like that, but you see then it becomes the mechanics of it as part of its continuity. Every now and then we'll have some incident that is forcing, it's dying for an honest conversation, but it looks like it's going to have a psychological conversation. People will think a psychological conversation is an honest conversation.
Yes.
You know, but basically, so they've created a psychological history for themselves because it covers up that, in fact, their life has been a mystery to them. So in one sense, one attempts to have a literal history. My parents were this, I came from there, I did that, my numbers are this. And so that literalizes me. And then there's a storyline around it that I occupy. And it's what is pure creative theater is literalized. And it's only in retrospect, when it is not owned by the psyche or the ego, but the story is seen as the art, it's released into the artwork that it is, that you see that you were a player, you were caring for the threads of it. So one gets a chance to see the creative aspects of their life from a creative perspective, meaning non-owning the story. That the creativity or the flow of the story is more important. And you see a life in flux. And you see a life in flux that takes shapes. And even in its own literal lifetime, it takes different shapes over time. But it carries a common thread. So then it resembles more of a creative act through time, where you get a glimpse to some degree of the life that you've lived through time, through memory. And you see that you were the caretaker of an experience. And that somehow what happened to you is not so accidental. Even though it had to appear to be accidental, it was not so accidental. You see the lining up of certain energies. You see the lining up of even atomic particles into creating a thing out of separate things. And the thing being impossible if you would have tried to organize these two characters into this situation. Their backgrounds and their circumstance were entirely different. But then somehow an incident allows this converging histories to share an experience. And that shared experience then becomes who they are to some degree. They may even put a different name on the mailbox and change their name in relationship or whatever, but it literalizes. You want the job. Look how clever you were. Look at everything, how everything was rehearsed, all the fights that you had to go through with John. You suckered me into that scene between you guys. Both of you engineered this theater of yours, didn't you? Hello. It looks like that in retrospect. That it was all, what do you say, Kerry? That it was all organized. Especially John knew how to put together a play. He knew how to put together the elements of a play or a movie. Mm. Do you not know that you were set up into a movie? Mm-hmm. You didn't know that. Is there a movie waiting in the wings there?
Oh yeah, I mean, I learned a lot, for sure.
Verily I say unto you, who said that? If a man has two sheep. Okay, I'm trying to remember all my prayers here. Are you okay? John just passed recently. How are you doing with it?
It's been tender moments of realization that there's no way to pick up the phone and talk to him or any of that stuff. It's been interesting. First experience I've had of losing anybody who was that close in my life. So interesting.
Let me see. I think if I'll speak to him, he'll start yelling at you again.
Maybe.
John.
Hey, can we?
Carrie, what the hell is he doing? What he was supposed to? Okay. So let's say there's a literal John who would still somehow be pissed off by your actions. Would you agree to that, Kerry?
Yeah, probably.
That if he had last words for you, he would have said, what the hell did you? Okay. And Derek?
Yeah.
So we have two Johns. We have John, but that would now be our joke, wouldn't it? So it was our joke while it happened. But it becomes our joke when it is no longer literalized. And you see that holy shit is probably a good description of this new spirituality we've stumbled upon. What do you say, Erja? Are you agreeing to holy shit? And how would you say it in French then?
Uh,
Sacre bleu?
well, if I said literally, it would be sacré merde. Literally.
Well, it does seem, you know, when you bring it down to ground zero, where everything has a motive, then as it comes down to the literalness of life, the motive of the surviving has also created such despicable behavior in humanity. The survival sense extent individualizes the person to some extent, or even if it collects a pack, where a pack survives at the expense of another pack, or so it literalizes as competition. Now, in the competitive element, in the technological world, competition is a refining element, but in the human world, cooperation was more the refining element, because different lives shared something.
Mhm.
So the differences in their lives were not so important, because the different lives shared a human feeling. In the marketplace, in the relationship, in the love affairs, the differences converged in a feeling. So in that, there was a cooperation. And the cooperation didn't need rules so much, or laws. It became second nature to you now, that there was, as your survival was also a survival of caring for a larger picture. That your individualistic survival was somehow related to a larger picture. And that was family, neighborhood, circumstance, school, whatever circumstance you were in. But for most of us, we've somehow navigated a literal lifestyle, or discovered that what is posing as a literal lifestyle is probably not. Also, that every human being must be going through aloneness. Every human being, no matter if they look like they have this job and they look like they're doing that, or politicians or whatever, you see that somehow the human condition runs through the story. So there's a collective and an individualistic aspect of the same experience. And that moving through time and space, you see the process of your life moving through time and space means this identity assumes different roles throughout time. But it came from a mystery, and it's going to a mystery, meaning to the body and the identity. Life begins that when you took a shape and form, and everything before then had a literal history to it. And that after the passing of the body, we then project another shape of continuity to some extent. But that's the premise, that our life is continuity. But there are certain experiences that may happen to you, like Kai said, where it threw her back 27 years, where she then entered into the story to apologize for something 27 years ago that meant nothing except to the person. But see how you can move back in time and space. And you see that there's a little pimple from 27 years ago that's still there. And that's what I talk about, that part of the brain that that has experiences, doesn't have time memory. It has memory in the moment. Somehow it associates the moment with the experience. So the experience was not, even though it may have happened when you were 10, it's still there. So when you're 30 or 40 or 50, it may be touched. Now, memory may be there that literalizes the event, but you see that the memory of 30 years ago, 40 years ago is in you. And the experience of 30, 40 years ago is in you.
Yeah.
In some ways, it's navigating. It literalizes at a certain point. Because when it happens to you, it takes you out of the moment that you're in and shows you a hidden dimension of your being. But it's a difference between a hidden dimension of your being and a repressed dimension of your being. So when there is a collusion with the brain and the body to repress an experience, somehow it colludes if it wants to navigate its continuity. But then you also understand that since that brain doesn't have time, the repression of that experience is still existing. So there's a moment, and it may be 30 years, 30 minutes, 30 seconds, it doesn't have time that way. That sends you back where you see the event from a different place. And so one experiences a life almost as a completely creative act. And you see where you made moves to survive and where you made moves creatively because they were inherently in the story. So when survival came into the story, the other person was generally hurt because your survival meant their loss in some weird way. So when there is a relationship, the premise is survival together. But in the relationship, if there's an indication that the one's survival is more important to them than risk the relationship, then you start to see that somehow in the relationship there is an I and thou. And when you then have a relationship on that level, you are then having a living and dying relationship also, where the actuality of the relationship is the depth of the experiencing that you're having. So then it buys time in the literal world. But time is not literal time, it's more seasons. Like the changing of, like now we're going into fall. It just looked like summer was just here or whatever. What a strange time this virus has given us here. And the Trump presidency, look at what we've just gone through in terms of the reality out there and what we're still experiencing if you listen to the news or hear anything. You see a really weird world up in the air. But as we come to experience our life, we see more the creative aspects of the life by seeing that living and dying simultaneously are in the story. And so it is not the extended situation as much as it is the depth of it. I feel that when one somehow creatively wakes up to it, one re-enters the story from the creative perspective. Did you go outside or no? It's carrying, we lost your picture.
Oh yeah, I just remembered I have to move the car. There's 2-hour parking here.
Okay. Is anyone else on there, Kai? No?
You're muted, Kai.
Oh, you're muted.
I'm muted. Sorry. John Kowalski, who's been joining us every week, is on, and Magic Sufi, who you know, and I'm forgetting his name right now, Michael, I think.
Michael Bravo?
Yes. That's who it is.
Okay, boy, oh boy, nice to see you. So I hope that we have a certain circumstance for those of us who are sharing this moment. And that is that a friend of ours in the family of friends passed away recently. And Kerry found him and then on his way to the hospital, then saw him off in the last minute, then called me, and I had a conversation, something, just a silent conversation, or a schmaltzy conversation, we'll say. Is that correct, Kerry?
Yeah, I think both of those.
Well, kind of hey baby conversation where we were both experiencing, in my mind's eye, what we have been discussing for a while, and that is the immersive that one has in the perception that living and dying are happening in the moment. It literalizes as death experiences, but in fact, the fact of all things are living and dying simultaneously, and that living and dying has an agreement, as a matter of fact, creatively. It literal, but one is usually, that is the fear aspect in the society of death being the thing of avoidance, the thing medically that you're avoiding, the thing socially that you're avoiding, that somehow you're trying to extend the life force. But when in fact something interrupts the life force and you re-enter the story, then extended literal living is no longer the dominant force. In terms of survival, is no longer the pressing force. It is an aspect of the story. But survival then shifts when you perceive that your life is in fact an artwork. And time and space is an aspect of it. Then the literal you is more like the Uber driver of the situation. You then have a kind of an inch away, you have a momentary consciousness. So when the rabbi or the priest asked me, am I a Catholic or am I a Jew? I said, in my smucky lifetime, I've had experiences where I discovered that I'm a human being who happens to be Catholic, who happens to be Jewish, who happens to be male. Those are identities that you're identified by in the literal world. But when you have the creative death experience, you re-enter the story where you assume identities, but your intelligence is assuming identities. And so it does resemble then the creative world of acting, and where it was somehow soulfully, you have to understand the other to represent them. That means you have to deal with something in yourself, the difference between your own historical self, between the creative aspects of your life and the literal ones of survival. So once something is evidence, and I use the form where reading in my mother's diary that she was a woman, something I also presumably knew, but to discover what everyone else knew, that my mother was a woman before she was a mother. Where everyone in the neighborhood and everyone who knew her knew that she was a woman who happened to be a mother. But you then had this whole story of her blocked by a mother who happened to be a woman. So to discover her womanness is to then be introduced to a parallel world that was coexisting with you all along, where you have a literal identity and a literal history, but then you also understand that there's an evocative story that's parallel to you. And that parallel story is that where your mother is no longer part of your history, she's now part of a mystery. And you then see the mystery that runs through the history of your life. And usually an accident will happen, a letter will be there, or something, a memory will come that will then send you back to wherever back is, where you see the story from the different perspective, where you see it from the energy's perspective. And that means from the audience's perspective, looking into the theater of yourself. And you see dimensions. So then you see where the screwing up was not exactly screwing up. That somehow the screwing up freed you from literal stories. That the screwing up may have saved our life in such a way. So you see, to some extent, the creative life doesn't do slavery well, doesn't do literalness well. Well, in terms of where continuity is the major feature, because it understands that in the continuity, being the major feature, it has to suppress the creative dimensions. So somehow you see a life that is navigated through feelings and loss of feelings, where a feeling shared opens up a doorway of possibility. And as the feeling shifts, the possibilities start to become dissolved. Now, whether they're actually, I think there is lag time. Just like there's lag time, I think even in my body, if it may surrender my feet first, it's swelling up. And now there is evidence that the body will surrender the feet and the hands in order to protect the organs and the heart and so on like that, and the blood, so that the body is constantly negotiating. And there's a negotiation with the outer world that happens inherently in it. And as you become aware of that negotiation, you see a remarkable thing. You then meet your body as a lover in some way. Not schmaltzy love of this or that, but a kind of affection as part of the perception of your journey. You see that the instrument has always been juggling a living and dying. And that life, in fact, has an agreement with living and dying. And that as you perceive that, your relationship to what the social structure calls death starts to shift. Because when you perceive my mother as a woman before she was a mother, then you also see that she was a woman and had that life before I was born and what was happening. So you perceive a world before you through a feeling. You perceive you before you were born. And then you see the identity that you've assumed in the literal story. But it also carries that other dimension that we'll call innocence, because it's not of the world or of the survival. It comes from a different place. So I would say that you that is silent in one's life is also has a dialogue with the mystery in the story. So somehow when that dialogue is happening with the mystery in you, then you'll start to discover Buddhism, or you'll discover this, or you'll start to have a literal effect of something that is happening to you. But then as you do that, you start to see a parallel world for yourself, where there's no literal identity. The identity is with the human. And when the identity is with the human, then there is an attraction that's happening to you, that happens to you, that others, even though it may be like there's a relationship where you're on other things, the basic attraction is that there's something that you're about in your life. So then the meetings with people will also have that element in it. It'll be more and more creative relationships. And somehow the creative relationships have their own integrity, where the ego doesn't own the story. Where it's not a possessive. But as you enter into a world where the ego does own the story and it is a possessive, the identity is a possessive, then you'll run into a fear of the, then you see that show business itself will try to literalize a situation. When the creative challenges that happen in a person, when they're living and they see, then once they start to see, they're coming from seeing. They're no longer coming from the survival element. So then how to around the future, it's not so laid out creatively. It's almost as if, what are you writing next? And so then you see for the next book that you're putting together, you'll try to have a stash or see if you can have a situation where you're free to do that. So then you see that you've created a life that is caring for a creative process in itself. So it's not so much that you don't have a literal home. Who's that? Kakalu. Should I answer that? 1 second. No. Do you get many of these calls? Carrie, do you get many calls like this? Cottonwood. It says Cottonwood.
Haven't got that.
Issues. Do we know anyone in Cottonwood?
No.
Where's
Cottonwood Mall.
Cottonwood Mall? Maybe that's what it is.
Yeah.
Okay, does any of this make sense, Urja?
Yes.
Yeah. What do you say, Carrie? Let's say again, this trick that we try to do every week or so is, let's say you get a chance to be Carrie. Hmm? So then, have you had many jobs as Carrie?
I've had some pretty random little jobs, but they always seem to be up in the air too.
I mean, specifically, they're up in the air, aren't they? Aren't they chosen that way?
Yeah.
Would you want those jobs for long term?
Nope.
Let's say the job of taking care of John. You say, okay, for the next 12 years, you'll be taking care of John. And you say what? No thanks?
Well, it was about 10 years, I think.
Yeah, I understand, but you didn't know it. Now we
That's right.
signed a contract. So
I
now,
knew it. I don't know.
if they would have said to you 10 years ago, hey, Kerry, do you want to do this for 10 years?
I would have given it pause.
And they say, well, what does Kerry do? Kerry cares for people.
Hmm.
What do you think, Kai? So you could see Kerry cares for people. That's his main job.
Yeah.
Then something happens with Kerry where it screws up. But let's say when you look back at it, it's not such a screw up. They were not fully. Do you understand that somehow you got out? Somehow God got you out of a situation before it became really hurtful or something like that. It was still, and I say why? Because there was true feeling shared, and there was trust shared. When something happens in one's body and brain when they have a trust, even if it's naive, even if the kid shows us pictures and we say, oh, how great, I kind of trust that you'll be true to it or care for it or something. Okay. So there is trust. And when something small happens that it's lost, it's almost like a nerve being shut down. Because then that relationship, once the trust is lost, which gave it meaning, then starts to dissolve in some weird way. And I think if you examined it scientifically, you would see it, in fact, it is dissolving. And that there is a process that a person is in when the feeling falls away. A process happens through time, but the immediacy is there in the first split second. But it may then play out in different forms. But the literacy of the story is no longer so. It's unhinged. So then the thing that the relationship that it carried on just because of the affection shared between the people and what was happening, once that is interrupted, then the carrying on becomes a problem. Because the feeling is shifted. And so the carrying on that was natural to it then becomes literalized. So you then have a job with John. So then you see it was always a job with John. It was always a juggling act of this and that, but then you also see that it literalizes. And as it literalizes, was once a shared feeling. now becomes a job where you owe that feeling. Something shifts.
Yeah.
Something happens that when you are in the creative act, you put your heart in it.
Mm-hmm.
When you go on stage, when you attempting to write the book or attempting to write the screenplay, you're free then to come from different places. You don't only have to come from the logic. You can come from the heartfelt. You can come from different feelings. There is real in the creative act as logic is. But as you get into the defined social framework, then logic is the prevailing sentiment. When a creative love affair is then reduced to logic of survival, it starts to lose the elements that connected it in the first place into the survival mode.
Yeah.
When it sacrifices that without knowing it easily, it adopts characteristics. So inside the person, there is still a yearning for true love, even at the same time that they're in a structure of survival. So something in them is still looking. While they've agreed to a status quo of continuity of surviving, they've also put in motion a relationship with the mystery outside of the literal story. So there is an accident waiting to happen or a situation waiting to happen because there is, I think, this lag time between the literal story and the emotional story and the spiritual perception.
Mm.
So then Carrie finds himself then in a similar situation that we've all had, where somehow the relationship that you're in was no longer, that you put something of a life together around, where you found someone else. But you found someone else because there was also an inner yearning for someone else too. So
Mm-hmm.
let's say, so then it looks like a duality. Let's say from the audience looking into the story, you would see a common story, but also a spiritual story, a creative story, a literal story. It exists on many levels. But you can see that somehow hurt runs through the story. And that somehow being hurt allows something to happen that couldn't happen if the hurt wasn't there.
Hmm.
And that the same person that may have said, "Hey, baby," to you, can say, "You little creep bastard, get lost." Or, okay. The same person who said, "Hey, baby, come on, why don't you hang out?" And says, "You little mother jumper."
Mm-hmm.
That's all it would take. Just like "Hey, baby" is probably all it would take if it was sincere.
Mm-hmm.
"Get lost, you mother jumper" would probably be as effective as "Hey, baby." What do you think? And effective in doing what? Ending the structure in some way. Just you could see where it dissolved in 1 minute.
Mm-hmm.
Something that may have taken years to undo, and psychologically, lawyers you would need to undo. But you could see that one statement would send the literalness of it packing. And that somehow love and hate can coexist and be in a seed. And that when the feeling falls away, the same thing that created a love feeling may create a hate feeling in memory and loss. Okay. So let's say there's a full spectrum of experiences. But when you experience hate from someone you love, you almost experience a death experience without dying. And when you are based only on non-explanation, because somehow you can't egotistically defend yourself in anything, you see that somehow there's an experience waiting in the story. And that someone will see that somehow they threw love away.
Mm-hmm.
Throwing love away is different than not finding it.
Yeah.
Meaning that you were in the midst of something all along and you were not sensitive enough to perceive something except in retrospect. And I say the reason that it does happen that way is because there is a broken heart in everything. And that broken heart is a conversation with the mystery, the other side of it.
Hmm.
And so the broken heart is a conversation that goes on then with the person alone in a way. That the conversation then has its own reality.
Hmm.
And its own existence. And somehow, even in its absence, it's coexisting. And then there are momentary occasions when it comes together and you see it, it's coexistence. And you see the move of Carrie. Then you see that Carrie's life has been somehow, if there's a feeling, then that has been the basis of much of what you've been doing. And then you see you've tried to make a creative expression out of that. It's almost essential to a creative life that one perceives that one is in their everyday living is in fact a creative life.
Hmm.
Because they don't have the security of karma. So that meant they've always left the element of freedom in their life for themselves that their lawyers would tell them is dumb.
Right.
But that somehow, if in fact it is an outrageousness in the circumstance field, it will immediately free each of us. If it dehumanizes to such an extent, you'll find a dimension of freedom that you didn't know existed.
Hmm.
So somehow our identity in the world is only an aspect of the story now, that it's a creative journey. And it's still not so over naive that it doesn't need rent money and doesn't, we're understanding that, but we're shifting it from part of the expression to neediness. It becomes neediness. And as it becomes neediness, it literalizes. But in retrospect, if you see the journey that you've been through and how you've gotten through it and what happened and the situations, how it unfolded, you start to be introduced to a creative view. And you see the relationship to John was a creative relationship that we shared.
Yeah.
And sometimes as it literalized, it would become impossible. But other times when it was simply shared, the simplicity of simply sharing it, you see the spiritual thread that ran through it. The relationship was to that thread and is to that thread. And so I feel a dialogue continues.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the dialogue with the person in the story. The conversation now with John is no longer around literally rent money or this or that. It is the creative aspect of the story.
Yeah.
And then you can see the fights, the arguments, the hopes, the schemes, and dreams are inherently written into the story. But that no matter what, somehow the story had its purity. So somehow the circumstance wouldn't let John be less than John. If in fact he started to organize selling his apartment in order to move in with the apartment with the others, and then others are afraid to live in there when no one had the strength to say, hey man, hold it. The living together is an agreement. So what do you think? You want to carry on, Kerry, or you want to get a job?
You know, I don't want to get a job out of a feeling of pressure, or I just feel like I'm in this really interesting place where there's a lot of nuance about where I noticed where I'm coming from. I'm very sensitive to it right now.
Okay. So then, what's your feeling? Is there still the fact that you're there? Did you sleep over also?
Yeah, I've been staying here, kind of wrapping, or just my stuff is still up in Lagunitas, and but yeah, so it's kind of in between.
Well, it's what do you see as happening?
I don't know literally how it would work if I take over paying rent here. I wrote them a check for last month, but they haven't cashed it. So I don't know how it would work in that sense. If they'll be okay with me staying on here. So I was going to talk to the manager and just see if we can have just a conversation. And then I guess Derek said that his sister was asking about the apartment. So I don't know if she has
Well, what
interest.
about again, if there is a situation for those who are interested, again, having that conversation where it then comes out of those who are interested. You may represent it, unless you literally want the apartment, basically carry it on your own in that way.
Yeah, I was thinking that it would be a good, if I could come stay here, I would kind of transition out of the situation living with Kat right now, which would be a positive thing, I think.
What do you say, Carrie? Did you have any ideas or feelings?
Me?
Yeah.
It seems okay. Sounds like Carrie wants to take care of the place. I think that sounds okay to me.
Well, we're distinguishing one thing. Now, the place after John was no longer just a place. The place was also where there was a happening taking place.
Mhm.
So what you had premised the other day was probably a conversation with some folks who were interested and some of the students who were interested in having something that more resembled something that you shared with John in the place and they shared with John.
Mhm.
So then carrying on the place was an agreement to some degree between you, and then Kerry would be taking physical care of that. If you, I would shoot for that, Kerry, if you can.
Okay.
That it doesn't, you see, because then it's not literalizing around you affording this or being able to do that. It may be, but that generally there's an agreement that the place itself is a creative place.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that that agreement would be a kind of force in relationship to the landlord.
Mm.
But right now, you would kind of be begging the landlord. You would have to hide what happened.
Mm.
Because as soon as they know that John is passed, they may just want the place back, which they've been wanting all along.
Mm. Right.
So generally, if in fact there is a group of friends who agree, then that agreement will have some effect, meaning that they have a very important or famous place in their building.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say that there's a group of people who love this person and that apartment, and they like to keep going around that affection. I think it's a different conversation, especially if the owners are in Singapore and you say, "It's Johnny D's apartment," and they say, "Johnny D?" In Korea or wherever the hell they are, and they say, "Johnny D's apartment," sure. So they would think like Johnny D was like Michael Jackson or something. Okay. So
Although I think John battled with them previously, so
they battled every step of the way, and I said, why? Because there was also a scam going on at the same time, a scam against scammers. Okay, and so if in fact they really are in Singapore or somewhere other place, you see that they're investors. The building is an investment, and they don't even know who lives in the building. You understand? Just like I was watching the picture of the Afghan people, but then there were guys who knew Afghan people and knew some of them, and what they were going through is a bit different than what we would go through because that's 10,000 miles away. But they have friends in that situation. They understand literally what's going down. Okay, and you see a different scene. So you saw the fight, just like the one that Jai had for her place with the landlord. even though they're surrounded by famous people and this and that, the landlord still found a way to bug you. But they bugged you because they wanted you out, because they can get more money. And they were after John because, but then remember there was a time when they offered him money.
Hmm.
And that offered money was based on moving in with all of you or something, some kind of situation. Okay. So then that kind of brought a critical mass. Why? Because he saw the money as his and didn't see it as sharing with you. So there was a struggle around the sadhana and the situation.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning that the journey spiritually can't be falsely conceived around survival so much.
Yeah, I see that.
But sometimes I may be forced to in other words, I see a transition happening from segue going from the yurt into the room.
Mm-hmm.
That in the room, then you had to see everything that was happening. Whereas in the yurt, you could just drive away and not see it or whatever. So that little thing, that shift then brought a whole different situation where the person's health is in front of you and your health is in, and there's something shared. But what has been happening in all that time manifests. I say that the situation, the philosophy almost has to do with an immersive. That people who shared some time together, even though they may break up or find a reason for literalizing, that the time that they've shared here will enter into the story some way. So then, even though we'll say, I'll have a fight with a Marty for some reason or other, and I don't even, but then you'll hear Marty giving talks like mine, explaining this and that, so you'll see that somehow part of the problem you had to hide that, where it's almost an exact copy of the thing or whatever. And I'm also, even if the string breaks, I'm also wanting everyone to be okay because it's only an aspect of the thing. If you utilize the talks, then there'll be a moment of truth coming to you. So we are in the midst of that. At the same time, we're regular people keeping it together. There's a kind of truth that runs through the story.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that we cannot be so inhuman. That seems to be happening in the world around us, where everyone's motive is so organized around its own survival. So let's say we've found a way to navigate through the world and still sharing it. And I still feel that, do you feel that there was peace in John's passing when you were there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And for you, Derek, you feel that the relationship is now clearer to you?
Yeah.
Okay. You see, something has to happen before it's kind of fully revealed, even though we were revealing it in our interaction. All the things, all the experiences were written into the story. Just by the nature and just by the juxtaposition of all the personalities. So can you predict scientifically, put these two personalities in an intimate situation, and what will be the alchemical process that happens? And I say, holy, could you imagine describing your situation? How would you describe your situation? Mathematically. Say, okay, get a person from the Philippines and bring them to the West Coast. Get a person from the West Coast and put them in the West Coast. Get an Italian from Brooklyn to, they say, holy shit, what a mathematical question that is. How could all these strange characters have an experience? And it seems almost that when you look at it, that they were fated to meet. And yet you could have never predicted that meeting. And that fated to meet means that some incident shifted the nature of the structure of your life. while you were still you, there was a creative process now of you also taking place. And so that creative process didn't have the literal logic that one has for identity. Again, one assumes the identity in the movies they've made. So you see in the 4 or 5 movies, you see that one in every movie you had to assume a different identity, but it was you. Let's say you who grew up who had a father, and then you who grew up who was a father. Or you who grew up was, so has the experience from both ends of it. And there's an aha moment of what happened to you when you are a father yourself and you see a similar situation that was a mystery to you when you experienced it. But when you perceive the hidden life of the people that raised you, that cared for you, there's an empathy that grows. And in that empathy, you understand that they were people. And that somehow the elements that run through the human situation is a kind of looking out for each other. That when one transfers that to another, in other words, the looking out for yourself as a normal, but once one has that relationship to the other where they become a thou in your life, then you see that the looking out for yourself becomes also a looking out for them. It doesn't have to be literally the same thing, but it's evocatively, they live. Their lives are clear to you. You carry the fact that they live, where in the news, they don't fully live for you. In the child, they live. They live in absence, they live in presence. And why? I say because they are living in absence and they are living in presence. It's a fact. And one has the capacity, even in absence, to have the same feeling as if it was present. The awareness of one's life introduces you to another dimension of the same experience that you were doing normally. But it then allows you to perceive the creative dimension in your existence. And the creative dimension in your existence is the director calling out to the actor, open your eyes, yell louder, move to the left, move to the right. So then you see a conversation with God in some way. It's not literally God, but a relationship that becomes God because it's a mystery factor. But somehow when your life is a creative act, you start to then step into creative dimensions that were hidden. And when you've made movies or wrote screenplays or whatever, you start to see, as you've experienced it, you start to see dimensions that were hidden in form. That somehow the creative act had to naturalize. That to the observer was a mystery, but you playing your guitar, you playing your thing deeply. To those who are untrained, who don't know it, but hear it. But then as you play it and you see the reaction to the audience and your relationship to them, you see certain nuances hidden in the playing. As your life is prospectively a creative act, then you start to see nuances in the story. So when I'm saying to Kerry, is that as you do this, and I've kind of invited and encouraged it, I'm also saying if in fact there is it can use an honest conversation. And if in fact, because I say why? Well, there's a difference between literally needing a place yourself and hanging out until they kick you out, or some other thing has to happen. Or it coming from some kind of agreement that you're looking out for the situation until it's clarified. And since it's one that is focused on the interest of it, but it may be that if you can come out of a creative agreement where you don't have to be the earner, or you don't have to be You may be the earner, but you don't have to be, where it's not a pattern of behavior of need.
Hmm.
It really is a soulful place.
Hmm.
Can that feeling be there, Derek?
Yeah, I like that idea.
It really is a soulful place. We don't have to make up a story.
No.
Because you've just been through a kind of soulful experience around it all. And since the apartment did come out of our inquiry and was gifted to John when he needed it, then it seems to me that that creative possibility is there. Although it became something else over the years and different interests owned it and it was sold many times, it still was a place that has our story in it.
Yeah.
So if in fact there can be, if there's a few folks who would like to have a conversation around it, but then I would also say, what it is basically that the place is no longer just John's apartment, but that it's also become a place that people consider an important thing in their lives and situations or whatever. So should we try it that way?
That sounds good to me.
What do you think, Derek?
Yeah, it presents a kind of uncertainty principle in there a little bit, but not something that's not a worthy thing to take up.
Yeah, it's just that it's dependent on coming from a clear feeling. But then, but also the literalization. Well, I'm saying if you literalize it because you need a place, I think they'll come after you. So
Yeah.
because then you're playing the game of tenant landlord.
Right.
But if in fact it's a shared space feel and it has that feeling in it, then you're kind of just looking for a kind of agreement that will allow it to hang out for a while. So where it's coming from probably has some meaning. I think that if it comes literally from you needing a space, they probably will kick you out.
Mm-hmm.
Have the power to do so by saying that their tenant is gone.
Right.
But in fact, you may even be able to find the original lease. That would be funny, and I would have to remember everything that happened there. That was a very important place.
Yeah. Eventually, they got John to sign one. The previous manager got John's name on it, just because he had a good relationship with him, but he passed away some years ago.
Oh, but the mailbox still has Frank's name.
No, they finally switched it a few years back.
Wow.
Oh, that's okay. So it is. Well, John was there 20 years or more.
Mm.
Yeah. Okay. So let's see if what you can do. Is that okay?
Yeah. It's hard to not let that's what I'm just seeing, those subtleties of the survival self, kind of trying to run with it. And it's just really interesting to see that come up and just sit with that and not, I really feel that I don't want to continue life from that place.
Yeah. No, then don't. Let's not say that there needs to be lag time in your own thinking process. So somehow you stepped into the role and you attempted to, as faithfully as possible, adhere to a feeling of friendship and take care of something.
Yeah.
And you also saw that you wanted to see to what extent that was perceived as a friendship. So you saw that it wasn't too well received with the family.
Yeah.
And because they know a John that you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And you know a John that they don't know. So let's say that the family didn't give you that creative expression. And you felt it.
Yeah.
Whereas that's why we asked Derek then to throw Joan into the story, because we felt that Joan with the sister may have just a simple conversation about, hey, your brother died and our friend died. And so so they may be able to share something So it seems to have happened, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Is the family taking care of the remains?
Yeah, we're waiting for the process, the procedure of cremation and everything. So I've been in more or less weekly contact with Cookie. So that seems to be because she does have questions about the apartment more recently though. So I don't know what her role is in that. So I'm being delicate, I think, with it.
But what was the questions that she had about the apartment?
Just she's not sure what she heard. The caseworker they were trying to pay the rent was paid, and is the question, is Carrie going to try and live there, or it's like I don't know how much to answer there. I don't know what her role is. I don't know if she can come in and say no and take the whole thing away, or so.
That's her call then. Basically, if she meets her brother after all these years that way, or she may meet you around something else where then Derek or John may say what you're thinking about doing, the place. And that could include her if she's got any vibes about her. I don't know legally that she has any ownership of it in that way, but that basically her vibe is welcome, her perspective is welcome. But a group of you are considering keeping a friendly thing going. Now, how to literally have a friendly going, but it's a friendly. It's an apartment that we shared. It was never literally owned by John, but it was a shared space always. And there is this feeling if that shared space can carry on, that would be cool. And then may introduce her to her brother's life in a different way also, if she liked that. But if she says, you bastards, the hell with you, we're going to come out, then they may be free to have it,
Right.
Yeah. Well, I started a response that way originally, like we were considering having it as a shared space that would carry on the memory of John and in some ways. And I just haven't sent that yet because I've just been in a holding pattern around it. But I think this conversation clears things up a little bit for me.
Well, I think this conversation can tell them that, in fact, it wasn't John's place. It was a shared space that John was the being at the time, but it was a shared space of family experience or friendship. So different people took the role of it and caring for it. But something happened in the time period that he was there where it was a shared experience with many people that became friends.
Yeah.
So the house became a kind of hangout for friends. And so that's why it's maybe challenging to the building or whatever, so many people coming and going into the place and so on like that. So it didn't need something, and also it needed meeting with other tenants there if they were under the same pressure. But now it's not a fight. As long as you guys have a feeling to maintain the space or be with the space, then that seems to me that you'll put that in motion. And if especially Cookie seems to be the one person who's stepped up in the family, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it does seem then that she can be introduced to the conversation that John's space was in fact a shared space with friendship over the years or whatever, and that there was a feeling to, if it's possible, to keep it going, but no trip. We don't want to be schemers. We don't have to lie. We don't want to do this. And basically, we like it to come from an effective feeling that there's a hangout between us. It's possible. But if they kick your ass because of it, who needs it?
Yeah.
So generally, see if you can pull that off, where in fact the difference between it being a literal apartment and it being a space where something happened to a lot of people and people have feeling for it. They may have a music school then in the building, or you may have, something that people then come to, or a school of some sort. But not that you have to fight for it. You'd like them also to want it in their own way.
Yeah.
I would say. Well, Will Wright, how are you doing?
I'm good. There's a lot going on.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, in the world, in Afghanistan, and viruses, and boy, it sounds like it's shooting off the world, isn't it? But we now have, there's Kerry. You see Kerry, and he's sitting there in John's place, John's old place, and he's sitting under that rug there. And he looks almost at home, although he also looks a bit tense that someone's going to come in and grab him. A little bit of tension. You say, Kai's got a little bit of tension in the neck still. Okay, so I don't. You want a mantra, or you know what you can take. Ignatia, 30x.
I took that before you recommended that.
Yeah, so that's always good to have. And what is that? They say there's a kind of doctor premise and some of the homeopathic premise that there's people who are inclined towards a hysteria. So they bring an attitude to the situation, which immediately then shifts into hysteria. Understand? So let's say if I'm a landlord and I look at you, Kerry, and you say, well, and I immediately would be hysterical for my investors. But if I say, look, we are creating our own theater in the building, and the participants have other tenants in it too, and we share lessons with them or whatever.
Yeah.
So we don't have to make up a story. If in
Yeah.
fact, I think the truth will prevail in some way. If you'd like it, if you feel it's
Okay.
okay. And you feel that the conversation with John is pure now?
Yes.
Yeah. And Derek, you feel that pure meaning, not that it's pure, like, ooh, but pure meaning that you have no longer a trip around it. You see how everything unfolded.
Yeah, definitely. There are lots of different shades in there. So.
And Will, you forgive John for trying to bite you on the nose? Let me look.
yeah.
No, I mean, as you remember, he tried to bite you in the nose and try to bite your ear and maybe your ass or whatever.
Well,
You remember it all?
yeah, it was an intense experience. Yeah.
Okay. So imagine how it was intense for him, what you brought to him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
certainly.
you're in John's head and you're in John's body, and then you do Will Wright comes into the room. And Will Wright says, well, you put the lime in the coconut and you shake it all, and it tells you his theory of existence. Do you remember your theory of existence with John and with Eric, with who else? Elliot. So let's say you come from that body of experience. And you say what?
Right now I'm trying to figure out how to have my family support me in starting a business, and they're familiar with who I've been or how I've been, the person you're referring to, and I'd like to move forward.
But is the core pissed off? Is there an underlying pissed offness?
I don't think so. I think that there's just a
No, not the literalness. Let's say you step into we understand the literalness of a circumstance. But you step into a situation which has more theater to it, meaning that you don't have much say. You're just a child, and then you become a person in the situation. And it's the situation you're born into, so to speak. And it normalizes. But you will know that there's a difference in the family and in the situation. So even though you're laying in bed together and smiling, you know that this one comes from the first, this and that comes from there's relationships and family And there's also at times when there's resentments and hurts, and those resentments and hurts become normal, but then they materialize. So then you say to that same family, hey, I like a bit of the inheritance money so that I can open up a dry cleaning of my plant of my own. They say to you, you ain't us.
Mhm.
Papa didn't like you that much. Didn't like the way you cut your hair, didn't like the way the whole spiritual trip of yours, didn't like any of that. And you knew that. And so everyone knew that was written into the story. Now you come along and you say, hey, I would like to invest in something. And they say to you, hold it. You ain't part of it. And you say, what you mean, Mother Jumper? I'm not part of it. I've been here all this fucking time taking this shit, going through all this crap, not having my life defined by it. Okay. So let's say that literally and legally, they have ways of knocking you out of the story when it just may simply be, since you're part of the family, it's just considered to be part of the family. And there's a natural sharing that goes on in the situation. That's what you're asking for? A natural sharing?
Well, I have a specific thing that I'd like some support with. I think that there's distrust, and a lot
So
of
then,
people in my family don't know me very well, but they just have been away from me for a long time, you know.
that's the logic. We were just going to have that before you arrived. Then Carrie was going to, at one point, was thinking of staying there in John's place, but then with Derek and others, we said, okay, can a group of people who had a feeling about the place then approach it from a different place? And that there are many people who shared experiences over 20 some odd years there. That even though it was a literal living space, it was more of a learning space and a shared situation space. Mm-hmm. And so some of the people who went through that would like to maintain and care for it. And so then having that agreement, then they can bring that agreement to the conversation. So basically what you've conveyed to me is that although that it's missing, the family is missing the capacity to have just simply a heartfelt conversation. And so then you have to figure out what is in the way of a heartfelt conversation. And the heartfelt conversation would be just as if you were perceived as a normal, as a normal member of the family. So then as a normal member of the family who is due to inherit some, I think, I don't know the whole story, but due to get some money, as a normal member of the family, then the conversation you would have is around something that's coming your way anyway.
Well, it wouldn't be. I mean,
Yeah.
it certainly wasn't stipulated that I was included in anything.
Okay, so the family not
Down the
collectively
line when my
agree.
mom goes or something, but you know, that's
So the family is not collectively, or as it seems now, unless there's an agreement, the family is not collectively seeing to look out for you and your mom as part of their own situation. So the conversation is that somehow you see from that, they're kind of excluding you from the circumstance in that way and including themselves. That's natural. That's natural, and they probably have their legal structure in order. But what I'm saying is that you have a moral question going on, that in having lived together all these years, even though they were separate families within the situation, there is a common care about the well-being of each of you that needs to be inherently in the story. Not someone else seeing their well-being based on you being broke. or poor. So somehow what you're asking for, you must look deeper into a situation so that it becomes more human. In other words, that what a good person would decide if they looked at the situation is where you'd like to be. Not so much a needy person. You don't really need it if it's really cheesy. And if they own your ass or kill you or whatever, or belittle you, so you don't need it. What you do need is finally to be an honest conversation in that family. And you understand how impossible that honest conversation would be, because there's many logical and social reasons to avoid such a thing. Because the more they see you as human, do you understand? And the more the conversation was there, the more you would be seen as human. And from the human perspective, I think that sharing happens naturally. Because there's a looking out for each other. Now, that doesn't have to literalize by getting into your life, but it is. Is this too heavy to see? Again, what Kerry was proposing and what you were proposing is missing an honest conversation. But not only missing an honest conversation, but resisting an honest conversation. And so at that point in time, I would say that they would identify with their father's pissed offness as a rationale of exclusion. But then basically, it's missing an honest conversation. But again, how structurally it's avoiding an honest conversation in order to make you this character. So then this character comes back into the story and asks for a loan. So it does seem to me that that you're implying that there was some hidden hurt and angry feelings around your mom and yourself in the story. And that was written into the script, where the person was not only supposedly pissed off, but he wrote down that he was pissed off and the reasons why and why. That becomes normal in these situations, but it's a dehumanization, isn't it? In other words, to get rid of my first wife in this circumstance, I would have to dehumanize her by literalizing something. But what you would say is the feeling is gone. I feel that if in fact you could put together an interest in having a conversation between everyone about where you're all at in this situation now. I think if in fact you can come close to an honest or heartfelt conversation, I think then the procedural one will come out of that. But if you try, from my literal understanding of it, if you try the procedural one, there would be a resistance.
Well, John, Heidi's husband got COVID, double vaccinated.
Yeah, I see that.
But it's also happening commonly. Do you have something in mind about what you'd like to create?
Yeah, I want to help. Do you know what highly sensitive people are? Have you heard of that before? Highly sensitive people?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember it.
I want to provide information and coaching for highly sensitive people who have chronic pain. They're sort of susceptible to it when highly sensitive people have acute pain, when they have injuries, they tend towards chronic pain more than most people do. And it can be something that just goes on and on for them. And there are some things that I've found personally, and some both personal insights, but also information that I encountered eventually. It took me years to find it, that was game changing for me in that domain. And so I'd like to help others with that.
What was the outer process that was happening to you, that was going on?
The chronic pain, or
No, I'm saying, did something happen in your life in meeting Nathaniel?
oh,
So there was a
When-
shift, there was a shift somehow in the structure of your situation. And then meeting Nathaniel then led you to some of his life, and also led you to us to some degree, but mostly. So your life did shift, didn't it? Hmm?
mhm.
And it shift around a kind of, that introduced to you also was a quest for a relationship as part of your life, where you saw that normally there was internally a quest for a relationship that may be specific at times when it's literally there, but in its absence, it's also there. So then you then stepped into a circumstance where that style of life became predominantly explored rather than ignored. So you stepped into an aspect of us through Nathaniel, and then through that. I'm on the outside looking in at what you're going through, but I'm not literally in the story with you. Okay. But I also understand that in that introduction to Elliot, your situation changed. That you had an experience in the situation that had you all over the place, psychologically, structurally, socially, up in the air, and that somehow the relationship does that to you. And then that there was a crew studying what you were going through. Now, the people were ordinary people living their lives, but then in the experiment, they're going through something that's studied by these other characters who have elements of similarity in themselves around relationship being a challenge, creative challenge. So let's say you are embodying an experiment that now enters into your life. Where before it may have just been simply the lonely guy looking for a friend or this or that, now becomes some kind of creative experiment in life, where it's looking for a truth, or it's looking for a feeling that touches it, or. So then you enter into a dialogue, and then you meet John, and then there's a reaction to you and John, because. But that natural reaction, I watched through the whole structure. See, I'm watching the Nathaniel structure, I'm watching the this structure, that structure. They all have their own expression. But I see it all around the journey, around the energy, and I see everybody in it yearning for the similar thing. I see the Elliot yearning for a similar thing that he's doing with his so-called patience for the moment. I see that John then was relating to in a similar way, but had a similar thrust of longing or yearning that then runs into something with you. So then what do I hear from when an Elliot is pissed off or John is pissed off, and they say, don't let that guy come back into the situation. I don't want to talk to him. And these two guys who fought all the time, if I ever brought them together, now an agreement that Will Wright bug the shit out of them about something. Did you try to bug the shit out of me also? Or I wouldn't let you get away with it? Okay. Okay. So let's say that, did you try to bug the shit out of me?
No, I wasn't trying to bug anybody, but I was sort of bugged.
Imagine me then talking to all of y'all about the situations that are normal for you. But to me, it's like carrying a basket on your head full of potatoes or something like that, that there's somehow a weight that you're carrying. And I can't say it's superficial, because if you take away the weight, you will discover a whole different dimension. So let's say the dimension that you have is literal, but the yearning that you have is creative. So let's say in a discussion of relationship, we bring both a literalness and a creative aspect to it. You then see yourself. You can see what bugged John, and you can see what bugged Elliot, and you can see what bugged them. And you can also see in your family what bugs them and how you bug them. And so you could even see how your mother bugged them. So somehow that bugging becomes you. If you say will to someone you've bugged, they'll say, that fucking will, that, well, okay. So then you understand the bugging will. And you don't even have to do anything. You just have to be will. But I can give you, now if we take the DNA of everyone in your own DNA, you can see, of course, this DNA that comes from Brooklyn is going to be affected by this DNA that comes from upstate California. So let's say we can see a scientific will. But let's say I say that Will bugs them because he's on a journey. And because he asks questions that require responsibility on his part, because he goes to the heart of something. And I say, why? Because now his desire is no longer just nuts. His desire is for something true in a world that's increasingly untrue, in a world that's increasingly survival bent. So let's say in a quest for a true love is nuts in this world. Now, true love becoming not some schmaltzy thought process, but in fact a genuine reason for being. That in fact, the reason for your being is not reasonable. It is that something in you is having a conversation with a mystery in the story. So there are accidental meetings that will happen. There will be situations that will happen that seem to be accidental, but are written in a larger picture. So you see the movie, it appears to be accidents happening, but from the larger script, you see that there was experiences that were happening. So then you discover in a circumstance what you kind of knew all along, that somehow you were still an outsider in this family. And somehow that normalized. But there would be moments when it was shown that you were an outsider in just normal thinking. Now, if something happened to someone, then they may, as we were discussing with John, all arguments may disappear in caring for the person. And you start to see the shallowness of all the arguments, even though they were structural in the form. You see the absurdity when it comes to living and dying, when it comes to heartfelt. You see the absurdity of the fight. But the fight was accurate in saying, Will is a tough dude. And if these tough dudes felt you were a tough dude, do you understand? And now I've inherited Will as a tough dude. Nah, you want to do, let me see you do tough dude. Go ahead, go into a whack out scene. Do impress Kai. Do some neurotic freak out. Kai, see how he does. Give him a. Greatest performance here.
Suppose doing it on command is
Not on command, but on.
kind of mastery, right?
Well, it is. Whip out that. Whip out that neurosis. Whip out that tough dude. Just for the moment, because we're prepared for it. When you do it, it may scare us at other times.
Well,
But be scary now. See if you can be scary.
I think it's just a tough way of arguing for my own limitations and fears that ends up upsetting other people because I'm
It
saying
upset
don't
me because
don't
now
mess with my fears. Don't mess with my don't.
But now no one believes you. They think of you, and let me see you. They think of you as a normal, healthy young man who is attempting to lead a intelligent and decent life. No one buys that you're crazy. You may act crazy, but they don't give you crazy any longer. So let's say they give you tools of your expression. So you may do crazy to convince these guys. If you may jump on the table and rip off your clothes and start screaming, whatever. But as an act, not as a reality. So you can act crazy, but you can't be crazy. Is that okay? Crazy is in your arsenal of expressions, but it is not you. You are now Will, and you're about to have heartfelt conversations. And it means that to some degree you are heartfelt. Not needy, not needing to get an investment or this or that, but finally putting something with the family to rest. That what they've normalized is indecent. And they only find out when someone passes away or there's a hurt that touches them so deeply. Do you understand? Where they feel like shit. So generally, there is a conversation not for your ego to survive, but you see what was missing in that family was a heartfelt conversation. And so in the absence of that heartfelt, you can see how you can be dehumanized. Where someone else's in the family's future is important, but yours isn't. So let's say we take spite out of the picture by seeing that spite is in the picture. And you see the thread of spite that runs through the family structure. So you see an action of spite coming your way. And it's hidden in legal form, but you see that it's spite. But you also see what has been missing all this time and avoided, not missing, but avoided in every way, was a hey baby conversation that had everyone sharing the same experience. So I feel if in fact you could see the importance of that, you may be able to arrange something that before it legalizes, before you say it legalizes, I'd like to have a heartfelt conversation with everyone where we can explore, and then out of that conversation, we can make our arrangements. But I understand how difficult or challenging or naive that may be, but you'd like the arrangement for the family to come out of the family's perspective, not so much driven by the father's hand. But do you discover then that the father all this time was a lonely old guy? And that he needed a hey baby also in some way? So it seems to me that if convenience, and they probably have enough issues to identify with, but it's still, if it's at all possible, before it becomes literalized, that there is something of an honest conversation with everyone, of a shared experience. Do you want to give it a shot? Or just do you feel like it's important in some way?
Yeah. Yeah, it's what's on my plate right now. There's a funeral type thing coming up.
Yeah.
So I'll see them and this isn't just that half of the family. As
No,
far as
just see the need for it. Because as you see the need for it, you'll start to see how each of the relationships are stylized around the absence of that. So the history becomes literalized, but it's missing an affectionate feeling. So it does seem to me that the conversation is about, hey, what the hell did we just go through and what the hell did we just experience here? Because it will be equally a mystery to them also, as it literalizes. But you understand that from your perspective, because of the stress in the family, you have suffered.
oh yeah.
And you have suffered and you have taken on a condition that was probably an intelligent condition given the circumstance, but is treated as a condition. But probably the so-called condition of yours allowed you to survive. So this is weird. I find in myself that the psychological conditions that I may have structured with or struggled with, in fact, allowed me to navigate the story because they were accurate. I even used the story of being a kid in the Navy, but when I discovered what it was, after the adventure of it, after the boot camp and being on the Navy and doing all that, the movie of it and girlfriends in Italy and Spain, listen, it was such an adventure. But then you discovered through the atomic weapons that you have and you're negotiating them, and you discover that you're in a situation that's moronic. And then you find yourself in a strange land because an intelligent conversation would destroy the circumstance you're in. Because the premise to violence is this pledge. But in the meeting, like you're seeing with many of these guys who served in Afghanistan, how they feel betrayed, how they see the con game of it, who won, who made money, who did this, who did that. And they start again to see the same circumstance or a similar circumstance where if you questioned it, you were in trouble. Because you weren't questioning it, you were having a feeling yourself that wouldn't allow you to participate wholeheartedly. So then they can see when there's a difference between one is organized into decision and one comes out of perception in the story. When one comes out of perception, they come out of a human experience. They cannot do dehumanization easily. You come from so it seems to me that what is necessary, that there is a sickness in the family, that it's missing an honest conversation. But not only that it's missing it, but that it's avoiding a heartfelt conversation. And that the avoidance is structured into the story. So that becomes the fact. The avoidance literalizes into a continuity. But basically, your premise is that you've shared an experience. And you shared its ups and downs and psychological states. And from a shared experience, you're having a conversation. I would still shoot for that, Will. Even though they may kick your ass.
Jeez.
No, I say because once there is an honesty for you, then there's also a nonviolence. But in the situations where I found, like I can be in a situation, I can assume a momentary identity to offset the violence. Do you know what I mean, Kai? In other words, if I meet all those Marines there, those old Marines, and they start acting tough, I see the nature of the toughness where I can just grab them by the nose or something like that and say, stop the shit. So even you can interrupt the ego configuration if you understand it to some degree, that there, it's like as if you put on a face of toughness for the moment because some tough scene is coming your way. But you're doing it to invite it to another place, not so much to interact with it, but it's not dominated by fear.
Danny, I need to take Tico to a rehearsal, but I can leave this going. So if you guys
Okay.
can copy.
We'll only hang out for a few more. I think everyone else is gone. Just Will and I. So let's leave it going for a few more minutes. Can you
Yep.
do that? Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Say Tico, hello.
I will. Thanks.
We'll see you maybe on Sunday.
Great. Okay.
Sure. Will, are you okay?
Yeah.
Does it make sense to you that somehow you find yourself in a situation where it's not that you can have an honest conversation, that the literal conversation is not an honest conversation. It is that what you're doing with someone is about to have a creative act together. And so therefore, what you have been kind of negotiating is an attempt to have a shared experience. Are you okay, Will?
Yeah.
Now I'm saying the psychological state that would come into you at times also may be baffling to you, but they have, in retrospect, you could also see if they've saved your life a few times. You understand that you've called on it when you needed it. So let's see if we can come to a kind of nowness, which is that you're utilizing the tools that you have. And your psychological states are not that different from your senses, from your hearing, from your seeing. It's an aspect of your senses in a way that's doing a balancing act or managing. So you'll see then that what were flaws in the past for me are now tools in the future. Because I see what the real meaning of them was. That any time that I was navigating in a strange system or even in an inhuman system, I would go into a state myself that didn't allow me to participate. And the important thing in retrospect is the non-participation in the thing because it wasn't nice. In the Navy, I didn't realize it wasn't nice. There was something in me that started to freak out, but then in retrospect, I was freaking out because it required me to be a real shit of a human being. So at that point in time, let me have a minute, I have to get something. Are you okay, Will?
Yeah.
Any questions come up? I think everyone's left us then. Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. So should we go? What's happening now for you? Is there a stress in the situation living there?
Well, I want to I want to leave my job or get to a point where I can leave my job.
Mm-hmm.
And the job is becoming radically more challenging, pretty regularly now.
Caretaking.
In an interpersonal way, it's the people who were employing me are becoming harder to work with. They have things going on in their lives, and their stresses are trickling down to me in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. And there's a there's professional training available where somebody who's created the sorts of businesses that I want to create
Yeah.
and has a lot of experience with it, sort of walks you through, but it's expensive. And I don't have the money for it, but it would be nice to be able to do that so that I could then as quickly as possible sort of get into providing for myself fully and being independent of this job that I've been hanging on to and stuff like that.
So it seems to be in the works. The question is, so then the element of family would be sharing the father's and your stepfather's estate. Mhm.
Yeah, that would be the easiest solution. Yeah, that'd be the easiest and sort of quickest solution, I think. But I only have a couple days and then I don't have access to that particular opportunity anymore. So that's why I feel it's like at a head at the moment.
Yeah, that's why, but I'm saying trying for it not to be, you like the honest conversation to be the honest conversation, not so much to have the motive of the circumstance.
Right. If it's a needy thing, then I don't think it's going to be that honest conversation.
Let's say your focus is that you finally come to some kind of livable terms with the family. That you could honestly say, okay, bye-bye, take care, I wish you well, okay, that there's an honest feeling in the situation. Then I would say the plans can come out of that. Meaning that now you'll say, look, but there's an overlapping. From the caretaking then to become a literal expression for you. But you also understand when caretaking becomes a job, then we have what Kerry experienced with John. You know, where he was the caretaker to John, but then it also had Social Security took it over and this and that and the payments. And so then it became a job. And then as Kerry saw it literalized as a job, then he also saw some elements of John treating it like he was a worker. So somehow you're a friend. And if you care for someone, you're caring for someone because you're touched by them. But if it becomes a job, and it literalizes as a job for you. And it does literalize because people need bathrooms, they need this, they need shoes. Okay. So it literalizes as a job where you are the organizer of it. When the premise was your presence was what was asked for. Your friendship was what you offered. And the friendship meant that you were there for the person in the room with them while you were there for them in the room. You see creatively what your work is, and then you see literally how it will literalize, where you don't want the literalization of it to take away the essence of it. You're doing it because it's the right thing. And you're doing it because it's a human thing. When it becomes slavish for you, and then you start to experience it problematically. So let's say the fact that you even assume such a role or such a job is evidence of the energy or creative expression. And if in fact you're going to make care your expression, then you'll probably, all the experiences that you've gone through are important because you see the person in front of you then when you're talking to them. So it does seem like I understand all the world is suffering from. You think you can get the Taliban to have a heartfelt conversation? But then again, do you think you can get the administration here to have a heartfelt conversation? Okay. So it seems like both of them will come from their motive. But two friends in the situation may have a heartfelt conversation that the governments can't have, because then they would have to care at another level. So I feel that you're in that, you're caring for something. And the heartfelt with the family is not around the motive. It's around finally the family being freed from the karma of their history and the hurt of the father, owning them. So you see that the past is in the story in such a way that it owns it. So Krishnamurti said around that time, when people could not come to a heartfelt agreement, the law steps in and tells you what to do. So basically, I think that there is, do you feel that I would say, if in fact there can be a heartfelt conversation in the family, not towards a motive, but the motive is freeing the story from its history. Okay, Will? Does that sound too absurd?
It doesn't sound easy. It sounds like a challenge, but
Let's say creatively, you go into it seeing that need, that in fact you'd like to be included in the circumstance because it is coming from a good space. So you see now, to some degree, you're excluded in the circumstance because it's coming from a very psychic space that's normalized in the family. So somehow there is a kind of hidden history in the family that everyone knows about. So what just happened to us? What just happened to Papa passing away, or however he was to you? What's the effect on us, and where are we with it? And the different takes that we had around the relationship. So you're stepping into a story, but you're stepping into a story from somewhat of a different place. And that is if, in fact, this family hasn't met each other. There's a meeting to have where you're really human beings. Not just angry this and that, but you're really people. So consider it and see how it comes to you. If you need perspective, call anytime, but I'm just saying creatively, look at the larger picture. There's still a life waiting out there for you.
thank you.
Well, you can see it's waiting out there for you. It's
There's some
yeah.
possibility is going to come next.
Look, the virus has done something remarkable to us all. It's shifted time. It's normalized 2 years almost now. It normalized it, for a year and a half, and now booster shots are out there. So we'll see. Did you get your shots?
The vaccine, yeah, I got the Moderna vaccine.
Okay, so let's see where it takes us. But so far, knock on wood, we're still here. Okay. Okay. Take care of yourself.
Take care.
Okay. Bye. Namaste. I'll see you. Again, call anytime if it's something over your head.
Thank you.
Take care.